Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. And today I'm super excited to have Daniel Lelchuk on my show. Daniel is a classical concert cellist and a cyclist and also a podcast host, and he is based in New Orleans. Daniel, good to have you on the show.
It's great to be here, Terry. And I have to say, it's a great show that you do. I've been listening, and the range of guests and just the range of topics certainly has been illuminating, to say the least, for me. And you do a wonderful job. So it's just a great show, and I'm so happy that you're doing it.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. The goal for this show is to have different, interesting people on every week. And in fact, we just did an episode with two colleagues from Harvard Business School that started their own business. It's a really amazing story, but it's a really, really amazing story because one was a refugee from China. He's a Uyghur, and his story is just incredible. So that was the recent one. And it's been a lot of fun having just diverse guests on. We've had, as you know, space people and guide dogs for the blind and a Navy SEAL and a Uyghur refugee from China, and now a classical musician, which is it's a big change. But I like to have different people, and I know different people. Just the life I've had, I've met lots of different people, so that's why I do this.
Well,
you have a podcast too.
Yeah, and I love being able to expose myself to. I mean, I never thought I'd speak to an astronaut ever, and then someone wrote me an email and they said, hey, there's this great book by this really cool astronaut. I said, oh, that's awesome. You know, they like, absolutely. And I never wanted to be one of those. You probably know a lot of people in your field who only know how to talk to people in that one field.
Yeah.
And music is the same way. I hate to say, most musicians are great at talking about music, but they don't care or want to talk about much else. And I never wanted to be one of those. I always wanted to talk to a physicist, talk to an astronaut, whatever. It's so much more interesting.
I'm exactly the same. In fact, yesterday I was on a call and we were talking about, one of my themes in life. One of the things I talk about is don't tell yourself no. That was my motivational lesson that I learned in my own career. And to a certain extent, that's true. Like, I really wanted to be a baseball player. I make the joke. There was this guy named Cal Ripken in Baltimore. If it wasn't for him, I probably could have been the shortstop for the Orioles. But the reality is, I never would have been a baseball. I was I was a below average high school baseball player, and so I was never going to be a Major League Baseball player. I was also never going to be a concert cellist or singer. That I can play the piano. I know I can hit like one note at a time on the piano, but that's about as good as I could get. Music is just something. I think a lot of people take lessons when they're kids, but the level that you've gotten to is pretty amazing. I've been listening to your music the last few days. It's really amazing.
Well, I appreciate it a lot. Music takes you over in a way that the passion for anything does. It just sort of grabs you, and it's just constantly refining. I'm always trying to ask myself, what can I do better next time? And there's so many little details that you can, get to a pretty good level or get to a high level, 92, 93%, but then climbing up 0.2%, getting those little details right is such a challenge. And every time I play and every time I practice, go on stage for a concert or a rehearsal, it's all about trying to realize the vision of the composer through myself without imposing myself too much, but at the same time knowing that it's me playing, and how do we make this all cohesive? So it's always a challenge, but it's fun. That's why I do it.
So, question, to get to that level, I'm a baseball guy, right? And there's tens of thousands of college baseball players and minor leaguers, but there's only a few hundred major leaguers, and all of those college kids can hit the ball out of the park, but they can't do it 30 times in a season. That there's just a lot of them can bat 200, but they can't bat 250. And that it's those small details that make the difference to get people to the next level. Is that kind of what it is in music also? Like, what makes you're in the New Orleans Philharmonic, right? The orchestra there.
Yeah.
So what takes you from being a music major in college to getting, such a prestigious position?
A lot of it has to do with just the tenacious quality. I think you have to know that in music, like in a lot of competitive fields, you're going to be told no, here and there. And you have to just know that deep down you have something to offer, and you get right back up. I mean, you don't win an audition, big deal. You go do the next one.
Right.
And there was what you were saying before reminded me of two quotes, both from great famous cellists that I remembered. One was Janos Starker, who said that a real professional is able to do it night after night, and that's sort of what you're saying about. I mean, not 30 times a season hitting out of the park, maybe once.
Right.
A real professional goes on stage, and no matter how he's feeling, he delivers the goods. If he's sad, if he's tired, if he's jet lagged from a plane ride.
Right.
And the other one was from Rostropovich, maybe the other cello giant of the second half of the 20th century, who said there could be people who play better in the practice room than I do, but I play better when I go on stage.
That is an amazing quote. I love that. I have my little notebook here. I'm going to write that down.
Oh, it's good.
So there was a guy, Michael W. Smith. He was a Christian. If you're into Christian rock, he was like the rock star of the 80s and 90s. He's a very famous guy. And I gave him a tour one time at the Johnson Space Center here. And we were talking, and if you listen to his work, he plays the piano. And he's amazing. I mean, he's composed, orchestra quality stuff. And he doesn't use music. He just plays it. Like that blew me away. I'm a math major, so I have to look at the note and I'll hold it down for a quarter note, And the thing that struck me is that his brain is just wired differently. I have some other thoughts too, but that blew me away. Do you use notes when you play the cello, or do you just play music?
That's a good question. In the orchestra and in chamber music, and chamber music being the small settings, we use music. It's just the way it's done. But when you get to know a piece so well, it just gets in your blood, in your DNA. I mean, I could probably play most of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony from memory, just the cello part.
Wow.
Because when you do a piece like that, the ba 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 ba, like that. Yeah. Okay, anybody in the world can sing the first few bars, but after having played it year after year after year, probably a few times a year, except this last year, maybe we'll touch on at some point, which is sort of an odd year for everybody.
Right.
Music just gets in so deep. There are pieces that I played when I was 10, 11, 12, 8 years old that I could definitely play today. And I haven't seen the music in a long time, but something about the muscle memory of the fingers, and the ear, it's kind of like a language. I mean, you're amazing with foreign languages. If you get a little rusty in a foreign language, it's buried back there somewhere, and it's just a matter of retrieving it.
Right. So,
I mean, how many languages do you speak actually?
I speak French, and I try. I'm okay in Russian. Yeah. And I dabble in a few other. I know a few words in different languages, but I love foreign language actually. I'm weird in that. I'm a math and science test pilot, but I also like foreign languages, and I'm writing now as an author, and I'm trying to do movies, directing and stuff. So I kind of like the left and the right side of the brain.
Yeah. Because your Russian is pretty good, right?
It's okay. It's pretty, after about one word, they know I'm an American, but that's all right. It's better than most people's Russian, probably.
Bet.
I mean, I flew on a Russian spaceship in Russian language, so I can get along okay. But before COVID, I was speaking. That was kind of my day job, and I did a lot of traveling. I've been to all 7 continents over the last few years, and for one event, I was in Austria, in Vienna, which is the unbelievable town, by the way.
Beautiful. And I've been a lot there, played a lot there. Beautiful. Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, so they hired out this room, and it was a typical European paintings and gold and ornate. It was just spectacularly beautiful. And it was where I was giving my speech. And then someone said, "Hey, this is where Beethoven first played his Fifth Symphony." That was like the room that was his opening night. And it hit me. And actually at the time I was doing a blog. Now I'm doing a podcast, but I wrote a blog. I think it was called The End of Genius. Anyway, it just struck me like what kind of life a guy like Beethoven, anybody in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, if they wanted to know something, they had to go to the library and get a book. If they wanted to hear music, they would have to take a special trip to the orchestra to hear it, right? There was no records or no radio. And and they just, like Beethoven just had to sit around and think, and we don't sit around and think anymore because of these things, right? And here we are on a computer, and yeah, exactly.
It's right here. I should put it, of course, it's on silent, on do not disturb, but just the fact that it's in arm's reach is
right.
A little disturbing.
It's telling. And that's actually kind of funny and kind of sad. So anyway, it just struck me that the way humans, I think physiologically, we're different now than we used to be because of this. The Air Force had an acronym. It's called CPA, continuous partial attention, which is basically the life that we live. We're continuously, we're never in the moment. We're always continuous partial attention. And for what you do, that's probably not good, because you need to just be still and get away from everything and play, anyway, that was a thought I had. Yeah.
First of all, what you think about the challenges just to stay alive, just to make it past childhood in the 17th, 18th, 19th century.
Yeah.
I mean, so many things were so difficult then, so much more than now. And yet you have people like Beethoven or Brahms who are writing the greatest music of all time. Right. Beethoven particularly, obviously, he went deaf as a rather young man, and his most famous pieces were written while he was mostly deaf or fully deaf. It's just kind of hard to imagine. It's kind of mind-boggling. When you think about the Ninth Symphony, or, even the Fifth Symphony, he was mostly deaf for the Fifth Symphony. He was mostly deaf for the Eroica, the big Symphony number 3. So it's kind of amazing that the physical challenges manifest themselves in such a way that the artistic heights are, who knows, maybe they're that much higher. It's hard to know. But what you're saying about attention span, CPA,
yeah,
because I know I've heard you say that NASA's full of acronyms.
Yes, it's like that's another language I speak. I speak NASA and I speak Air Force, which are two different languages.
And they both have a lot of acronyms.
Oh, it's nothing but acronym. The book, the How to Astronaut book you were talking about, I just make fun of acronyms. I put all the acronyms down, and then I always have in parentheses the English translation. I never like spell out the acronym. I just ARED in parentheses, the NASA acronym for workout machine or whatever is kind of that's how I handle it in the book.
So CPA. So here we are with this. What's it stand for again?
Continuous partial attention.
Okay, continuous partial.
Let me Google that.
which is basically what we're all doing when we're on the phone, and then we hear a buzz, so we look, and then there's a text. Let me see what he said. But wait, I'm talking to that other guy at the same time. In music, it's bad because music deserves and should have your full attention.
Right.
And there should be no distraction when you're playing music. You shouldn't hear a drill in the background. You shouldn't hear the air conditioning, let alone your phone. It should be absolute silence, because music, I think it's a matter of respect. It deserves our full attention. And whenever people throw out the term background music or something, I don't like background music for so many reasons, but I don't like it mainly because it's so much better than that. Even most music you hear at a party, if there's a string quartet or something, they're probably playing really good music.
Right.
And I'm not, morally, I'm not preaching a high ground. I'm not saying everybody needs to go to a very formalistic classical, but it's a little sad that you have a Mozart being played in the background where people are talking about
ignoring it. Right.
Yeah. Drinking cocktails and talking about what app they discovered, in the app store or something. It's I'd rather people hear Mozart than not.
Right.
I guess there's that. There's like, in the background, there's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Oh, that's cool.
But I played that. I used to, when my kids were born or before they were born, we'd play music for them. And he had this little thing for babies that was Eine kleine Nachtmusik. You had to put like the circle in the circle and it would play a note. I forgot exactly how it worked, but those songs, how I learned classical music, which is probably how most people my age anyway, was through Bugs Bunny. I don't know if you're probably too young for Bugs Bunny, but
no, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes also have a huge amount of classical music, just a ridiculous amount.
Barber of Seville, whatever. There was I am familiar with much of the classical music. I know I got through cartoons, and that's kind of sad because there's no cartoons there. It's not like the Saturday morning cartoons that it used to be. It's they've devolved, and anyway, so kids.
Well, what are cartoons? I don't know. I don't know what cartoons are like today, but I know that you're not the only one to say that. A lot of people have these great memories of just learning, and it's not like the music was the goal. It's not like you were being preached about music, but
no, right.
But it just the sound got in your ear, and now when you hear it as an adult, you recognize it. You say, "Oh, I remember that from when I was 11 years old or something." I don't know what cartoons are like today, but I would bet they're not playing Rossini.
I don't think SpongeBob is doing exactly Rossini or Chopin or whatever.
It's too bad because this whole thing. We always ask the question, why don't more young people love classical music? And to that, I would say, I think they do. They just haven't been properly introduced. Because
absolutely, yeah.
I very rarely, I'll give out tickets to a concert, or I'll post on social media or something. Hey, I have 2 tickets for this Friday night. Anybody want them? Who will come? A realtor friend of mine, or a scientist, or whatever.
Right.
And they don't really know or like classical music particularly, but they always end up loving the concert. So it's just a matter of getting people there. And I think that's it's a challenging thing, because once they're there in the hall and they see, oh, it's not so intimidating and I don't need a big background or formal education, I think they realize that it's great. The problem is, if we can get 15, 20-year-olds there, as opposed to 60, 65 when people start out. Often they start out, later middle age, or they say, oh, I'm now 50. I have to buy season tickets to the Symphony. But I wish college students would once a month say, we'll go to the Symphony and then we'll go out to the bar. It'll still be open. Don't worry. But it appeals to everybody. Classical music, I really do think it appeals to everybody. If we take away the preaching and we take away the extra stuff and this whole mystique, which can be fun, but also, there's no dress code, come as, you feel comfortable.
Right.
And just listen and have a good time.
I could not agree more. And, of course I like STEM. I'm a math and science fan, but kids also need to learn history. They need to learn literature, and they need to learn the arts, and music, I think, is something really important. And unfortunately, that's usually the first thing that gets cut from the school budget. No one's going to cut the math teacher or the physics teacher, but the arts programs, kids need that. And that's something that I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're involved in your local school board, make sure that there's a way for kids to learn the basics of music and art. I think that's really important, for sure.
I have 2 questions, but I'll make a comment on that, and then I'll ask the question I have of you. Just where I grew up in rural New Hampshire, near Dartmouth College, Hanover, New Hampshire, incredible public school system. Now, I had started playing cello earlier. I'd started at age 4, but starting in the 4th grade, all the instruments of the orchestra were available in the public schools, high quality instruments. You could learn violin, cello, bass, viola, piano, not to mention all the band instruments, a great choir system. And this is in public school in Hanover, New Hampshire. Now, granted, it's a very wealthy area and there's a lot of resources, but look at what it produces. It produces people who are able to go into society with a much broader view. I said this to someone the other day. It's not that, well, like what you said before, college athletes often don't become professional. People who play band or orchestra in 6th grade often don't become professional, nor do they want to be, but they're much more well-rounded people. They have more general skills, and who wouldn't want their colleague in whatever field to have that broad background?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very well said. When I was a kid, and I think it was 4th grade, I played the French horn, and then the next year I played the trombone. And my parents, we had a piano at home, so I took piano lessons. And I'm better for it. I wasn't very good at it, but I'm better today, and I can still I pick up a piece of piano music and play, like I said, one note at a time.
Yeah. And you
Anyway,
like
that's a
music,
good thing.
most importantly.
Everybody likes music. I saw
Yeah.
this. It was an article recently. If there's one thing on earth that everybody likes, it's music. It's very interesting I think that's literally the only thing that, I mean, everybody likes food, obviously, but music is like the one universal. Some people don't watch movies. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't read. People don't exercise, whatever, all the stuff we do, but
Yeah.
music is universally loved. And classical music is kind of if English is the language of the world, classical music is like the music of the world. Everybody at least recognizes the greats.
You know that in Tokyo, there's a New Year's tradition of playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And in Tokyo in 2019, so right before all the lockdowns began, so the last year we have the numbers, there were more than 30 performances in December 2019 in Tokyo of Beethoven 9.
That's amazing.
If that doesn't show you how universal the sound of music is, the sound of classical music, there's something about it. You're right. There's something about, I mean, Beethoven 9 is the quintessential piece of classical music, and whether it's played by the Afghan Women's Orchestra or which they have and very beautifully, or some orchestra in Tokyo or Costa Rica
China,
or wherever. Or in Houston, the funny thing is it kind of all means the same thing to the listeners, which is, I think, why the universal appeal. Everybody has their own story that they come away with, but at the same time, everybody feels the same in a way. There's both. And I think that's maybe why the piece has such staying power in every country, every part of the world for hundreds of years, because there's a thread there that just connects us. But I was going to ask you mentioned STEM before, and I was going to ask you, as someone who spent a life in STEM, how compatible you think STEM and the arts are. I mean, shouldn't they more interlock, more? I hate that they're so separated. And I don't know, I've spoken with Walter Isaacson a few times on my podcast, and he's all about connecting STEM and the arts, and he's a huge believer in both. I wish more people could see the advantage of trying to get them to work together.
Yeah, the new acronym is STEAM, and A is, instead of STEM, it's STEM plus arts. So STEAM is often used. And for me personally, I think maybe I'm weird, maybe not, but I was a math kid, but I also liked the arts. I was probably in high school, I was probably the least likely to write a book. I tortured my poor English teachers. I still feel badly about how bad I was in English, and now I write for a living. I was writing this big screenplay last night. I just turned it in. So it's weird how, I just enjoy both. And I think that kids benefit. And I think there's something to be said from, like you talked about, just having an education, not just job training, but like being educated, understanding history. If you understand history, maybe you'll make better choices when you go to the voting booth. If you understand the arts, your life will be better. Like there's a saying in France that is, I think, very true. They used to tell me that Americans live to work, but we work to live. And so having the arts is kind of what makes life fun and interesting. And music is a big part of that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And imagine if you lived in a city and there were no parks, no museums, no symphonies, no good restaurants. I mean, what would be the point of being there? And these things, I mean, in America, the way we support the arts in our museums and our symphonies is philanthropic private donations mainly. We don't have a government supported artistic system here like they do in Europe. And that's okay. We make do, and we have lots of wonderful, generous people here who believe that the arts are what anchor a city, what anchor a country, and help bring a sense of continuity. Of course, science is cutting edge. I mean, no one's ever going to think of a symphony orchestra in the same sentence as CRISPR, but it's not cutting edge gene technology. That's okay. Not everything's going to be like that. But there is something about having people who are casual about it, who are maybe someone like me who can just chat about it casually and then play to demystify a bit, because I think some people, it's just a misconception for a lot of people. But what you said about food, I mean, I think actually maybe music is the only one, because some people really don't like food or care about food that much, really.
Right.
I mean, I think you do, and I certainly do, but there are some people who, basically don't care what's on the plate. And that, to me, that sounds so boring. I mean, really, you're going to live 80, 90 years and not be that interested in what you're eating? That's crazy.
I know. Well, so you just touched on something interesting that I think most people don't understand. There's probably a common misconception. Well, first of all, when it comes to government funding, they did a study years ago, and people thought that NASA got 20% or 25% of the federal budget. And it's it's like 0.5%. So a lot of people, they'll complain about NPR, that there's too much government funding, or PBS or whatever. And the reality is, I think there's very little funding of that. And when it comes to the symphony, like Houston has, the Houston Symphony is amazing. They have this beautiful Jones Hall. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that comes from basically wealthy people.
Yeah.
A lot of times, who make big donations. Is that true? Is that's how we do it in America?
That is how it works. Of course, there are foundations that give some monies, and national foundations and things like that. But basically, and corporations in a city, a bank will give money or be a seasoned sponsor, but individual people give, and not always. If you look at the list of donors in the back of a program, it's interesting, because you'll have the different levels, and then as the levels go down, obviously the list of people gets longer, and most places have like $50 level.
Right.
And I think that's great, because some people really could only give some could give nothing, but some say I can give $50 a year.
Right.
And to a lot of people that wouldn't seem like a lot of money, but if that's all they can give, and they choose to give it to a symphony, it's a way of saying, I think this has staying power for me and my kids. And the people who write a check for $500,000, that's wonderful, because that enables an orchestra to charge less for an entry-level ticket. You can usually get a pretty cheap ticket to a symphony. That's another misconception. Movies are expensive. If you go to a movie, let's say you have wife and kids, so there's 4 tickets and drinks and popcorn and maybe $100, Twizzlers. Yeah, how much would it add up to, do you think?
I mean, you could easily drop $100 going to the movie. Yeah.
Easy. Yeah. Oh yeah. Easy. So, so a lot of this just, cheap ticket, $15-20 for the symphony. You can get in, or student tickets or something. But the NPR PBS thing is really funny, because it's just a drop in the bucket of their budget that they get from the federal government.
Right.
I mean, this whole idea that, we're going to take away the funding, we're spending too much. These places, first of all, would basically all be fine, because they don't rely. I mean, they certainly appreciate what they get from the government.
Right.
But it's laughable how little government monies goes to the arts and goes to public media. I mean, it's really just 0.000 something. I mean, many zeros probably.
Right.
And that's something that, I don't know, is very different than other countries. I think that when people say we need to cut the budget for the humanities endowment, why? I mean, that's how NASA's, and I mean, that gets spent in, 22 milliseconds in Iraq or something. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah. And we've spent trillions of dollars, and the war's been going on for over 30 years,
Yeah.
And it's cost us trillions of dollars and a lot of lives. But the arts, so when you give, or for a symphony, how many people work at the New Orleans Symphony? Is it a full-time job? Is it a part-time?
Full-time job. There's about 70 full-time musicians.
Wow.
And of course the past year has been really strange, but I've had so many silver linings. Like, I think a lot of people have had a lot of silver linings over the past year. Mm-hmm. The biggest silver linings that I started my podcast, which is now over 100 episodes and is going great. Right. And that wasn't a COVID idea. I'd had the idea for like 5 or 6 years, but I finally had the time to do it, because I had gone to a family property up in New Hampshire on a lake in March 2020. And I was sitting there looking at this frozen lake, drinking coffee and thinking, I wonder if I'll ever go on stage again and play the cello. you know what about that podcast idea you had 5 years ago? So,
Right.
I was able to do that. And I think COVID also, I don't know about for you, but for me and a lot of people I know, it kind of clarified a lot of things, like what matters in a way,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been interesting because it's been such a horrible year for so many people, but there's been a lot of pluses that have come out of it, I think.
Yeah. I love that to think of what's been good. I mean, the bad was obviously so many people got sick and died.
Yeah.
That was awful.
Yeah.
The economy shut down. Ironically, the stock market is at an all-time high, and a lot of so there that has been one silver lining. But I think personally, I think exactly what you just said. If you can learn from it and
Yeah.
kind of clarify what matters and what doesn't matter, and then you can, take it not as there's always a silver lining. I guess
Yeah.
I like the way you say that.
Yeah. I mean, did your book come out of COVID, or was that, had you been doing that before?
I started it before COVID. I finished
Yeah.
it. I think I turned in the final draft was right at the beginning of COVID. So it was mostly written beforehand, but I did have to add a They asked me to add an afterword, or I added a thing about comparing being stuck in isolation in space with being stuck in isolation for COVID. So one chapter out of the 51 actually came from
Yeah.
COVID. And then I actually wrote a separate book about that, about just comparing being isolated and not. It never got published, but all of a sudden I had a lot of time on my hands, so I wrote a book one week, 1 month.
Yeah.
So the stuff like that. I think the other thing that you can use from COVID is we don't necessarily need to go back to the way we were. We need to maybe go back sort of the way we were, and sort of the way, we learned a new way of living. So if you can pick the best of both worlds,
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can go back better than we were before. Or even your job, like companies that don't adjust go out of business, like Blockbuster or Polaroid, or,
Well,
MySpace.
Polaroid is, I see Polaroid around sometimes. There's a little niche for Polaroid, but maybe Kodak.
Kodak is still that. Kodak there was a meme stock for a week. They were doing some government thing. I forgot.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's right. The great hall up in Rochester, New York. You've probably spoken there or been there. The great concert hall is Kodak Hall.
Yes, that's right.
It's a beautiful hall. Maybe you've spoken in that hall even.
I did a speech there for National Geographic.
There you go.
I did. Yeah,
that's Kodak Hall. Yeah.
I forgot about that. You're right.
And that shows how important it is to have corporations that, at least in the past, but I think now too, care about culture. I was talking with someone. I said, this whole corporate world that I'm not particularly familiar with, but wouldn't someone who's really visionary want to create a culture where culture matters?
I like that. Yeah.
Where there's something aspirational, where, yes, Kodak will give money to have a concert hall. I mean, what a wonderful thing.
Yeah. No, companies do a lot of good. They get a bad rap and they get bashed all the time. Honestly, they're leading the charge on climate change. Businesses are actually doing stuff where governments often don't, and they take, governments lag behind. Governments aren't doing anything about really the tech industry. So the tech industry is trying to do things. Companies support the arts. So businesses aren't all bad. Some of them do some good stuff.
Some do, yeah, absolutely. Because you have sort of one foot in. Well, you had both feet in government forever.
Yeah.
Now both feet in private sector, or one and one,
yeah.
or are you?
No. I'm done with. I left NASA a few years ago, and I am done. It was kind of scary because that paycheck came twice a month for 30 years.
Yeah.
And now if I got to kill to eat. So the good news is, you can eat more if you do well, but if you don't do well, you don't eat anything. So but I really like it. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I like being on my own and having opportunities. And so that's been a lot of fun. I'm working on trying to do a business startup actually. And
really,
Yeah, yeah, renewable energy business.
Hmm.
In fact, today I've got several meetings about that. So that's just fun,
Wow. Yeah.
trying to create your own thing. NASA was great. I mean, being an astronaut was pretty awesome, and being a fighter pilot in the Air Force was great. But you're in the government,
Yeah.
and so there's only so much you can do, and you're doing basically a government job, and
Yeah.
I enjoy being in the private sector. And so being a musician, that's an interesting thing. Is it government or private sector? I mean, you have a job, you have a
Yeah.
boss, I'm sure, and
Hmm.
but you're but you're working with artistic people. So like, are the offices all a mess?
I don't spend much time in the offices. I usually just I go on stage, have my
Right,
rehearsal,
right,
and then I leave the hall as
right.
quickly as possible. And sometimes I remember when I was ninth grade, I started driving down from New Hampshire down to Boston every weekend for lessons and for youth orchestra, because
Right,
at a certain point, being good in New Hampshire isn't good enough. So
right.
you got to up it.
Boston's got to be big time, I would imagine.
The string playing in Boston, the string playing is the best, maybe the best in the world. Unbelievable. And so I had a great teacher in the Boston Symphony, and we'd
Wow.
have a lesson. I'd go to the concert every Saturday night. By the way, ticket cost $14,
Wow.
and for restricted view, but that's okay. I just had to crane my neck a little bit, and
You just need to
um,
hear, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so he'd always, we'd be at dinner. It would be 7:10, 7:15. A concert starting at 8, so it's 7:50, 7:55. I'm like, how's this guy gonna get in the hall, get in the tux, put on white tails and everything? But it happens, and then here I am, walking in at 2 minutes before,
Right,
throwing on. But you get in the rhythm of the job, and
right.
you know that you can walk in at the last minute, sit down, but the second it starts, you're there, laser
You're on. Yeah.
focused. You're on. Yeah.
I've done a lot of interviews on TV and stuff, and now I do them here in my studio, but I used to do them in the studio, in the real studio. And especially like the morning presenters or whatever. There's a guy, Marty Bass. When I grew up, Marty Bass was on the air in Baltimore, and he's still on the air in Baltimore. And I remember we were talking, we're just like having this conversation, blah, 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 blah. Hold on a second. And welcome to Baltimore. And he just, like, in 1 second, he just rotated and was on air.
Yeah.
And we'll be back after the break. And then, so what was going on? It was amazing how, like you were just describing, how he could, I guess when you get good, like flying, I got to the point flying where I could just walk out to the jet and do the complicated mission without thinking about it. I guess whatever you're good at. Do you play anything besides the cello?
I tell people I'm the world's worst pianist.
Yeah. Everybody
And
plays piano. Does every musician play piano?
I think in an ideal world, every musician would play piano decently.
Yeah.
I would love to take piano lessons, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I took piano lessons a lot. I took them as a kid. I took them in music school. You have to take a certain amount of piano. You have to pass a level of piano proficiency. And it was so tough. And I could never really get to the point where I was playing well enough to really have a great time. But, I was a little proficient. But I should go back to it, because piano is the foundation of everything. You can play all the chords, and you can basically, it's all there. But I don't play another instrument. Well, in middle school, I took up the double bass because there weren't enough in the string ensemble in middle school.
The what bass?
The double bass, the bass.
Okay.
The big one.
But is that just like that's the big string instrument?
That's the big one that you see in a jazz band. Yeah. And you see on the side when you go to the Symphony in Houston, you see them piled on the side there. The really huge ones.
Right.
But no, my dream from like age 8 to 12 was to be a great operatic tenor. I was obsessed with Pavarotti.
Huh.
Absolutely. I've been playing cello since I was 4.5, but I got the opera bug early and powerfully, and Pavarotti was just the king in my world.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I was a pretty good boy soprano. So when my voice changed, I realized I didn't really know how to sing anymore. And so I wasn't going to be an operatic tenor, but there was an total idolization of Luciano Pavarotti that I still feel today. And I was extremely moved when he died. And I don't know, there's something about his voice and his whole persona. A great movie came out recently about Pavarotti, and it was in theaters. I saw it right before COVID. It was wonderful.
I'll watch it. You remember what it was called?
I think it was either called Luciano or Pavarotti, I think, by a famous director who you would know. You would know the director for sure. But a beautiful, he did so much good. He raised so many millions of dollars for children's funds, and he did concerts with Sting and all this. That larger than life persona, I love those. I don't know how many there are around today. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. The stars we have today are not the stars, that we had. It seems like, anyway.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's boy bands, and, it's just not the same.
No, and watered down. I don't know. Same with in so many fields. Yeah. The stars don't seem as starry.
You have an amazing voice. I was wondering if you sang, actually, when I was kind of watching some of your stuff, but you don't. That was a childhood thing only. What you have a voice for, Dan?
Yeah,
is you should be a baseball announcer.
Oh, can you get me a gig?
Let me call up my thing. You would be a great baseball announcer. You got to get excited when they hit the home run, though, because they got, they're going like, and it's a 3-2 count, and the runner's taking the lead off, and there the ball goes, and it's out of here. You have to be able to.
I can do that
really quick. Yeah,
I can do that. Sure. Get me the gig. I'll study up. And you can evaluate me when you hear me.
Well, but the thing is, you're on air for like 3 or 4 hours, and so you have to talk about just random stuff, and it's baseball. It's my favorite sport. But yeah, I go in occasionally, and I'll be in the fifth inning, join the radio announcers for an inning or something. And
oh, really?
I've done that a few times, yeah. And I was doing it once for the Orioles. I'm an Orioles fan, and the Astros. I've done it a few times with the Astros here in Houston, and I was doing it for the Nationals after my shuttle flight. And anyway, they're like, "Hey, come in for the fourth inning." And so sometimes it's a 1-2-3 inning, ground out, pop out, and it's a 2-minute interview. Yeah. Well, this inning, they went through 2 relievers, and they had, they scored like 8 runs or something. So I was on air for like 30 minutes, which is fun. I loved it.
That's amazing.
I would love to, one of these times, I would like to let them have me call the game. I'm going to try, and I'll see if I can do that. If there's like a really boring game that no one's listening to, maybe they'll let me call an inning.
That's amazing. Wow. I loved baseball when I was a kid. I played second base for a bit in middle school and stuff. I played lots of sports, but unfortunately, when you get serious about music or about anything, you have to stop doing certain things. But we used to go, me and my dad, my best friend, who's also named Dan, and his dad, we used to go down pretty often to Fenway Park, and see the Red Sox, and it was great. We drive down to stay at his grandmother's house in Newton, take the train into Fenway Park. Yeah, I mean, it was just perfect. And remember sliding the program under the fence to get Pedro Martinez to sign it.
Oh wow, that's cool. That park it's amazing. It's baseball cathedral, but it's kind of nasty. I remember it kind of smelled like pee, and it was built in World War I or something, but it's historic, right? It's Fenway. You gotta love it.
Yeah, that's right.
The seats are like these hard, small. They're made for like 20th century people, not 21st century people.
Anyway. Yeah, that's right. Like in the old concert halls, you have to sit like fit elbows,
Right, exactly. Well, that's awesome. So, what advice would you give? Probably some of my listeners are not classical music experts. So what should they listen to besides, Daniel Lelchuk pieces? But there's, should we listen to Beethoven? I remember I went to, in Paris, I went to the Sainte Chapelle one time, which is this small church right next to Notre Dame, and had a string quartet play Vivaldi, the Four Seasons. And it was like, it was sublime being in this European cathedral, listening to 4 strings playing the Four Seasons. It was amazing. So what should people listen to? What's a good starter, playlist?
That's a good question. And it's funny because I always ask people on my show, what are you listening to? And they always say, that's a tough question. So here I am saying that's a tough question. Starter playlist. I think you need to listen to Beethoven 5 because we all know how it begins, but the way it ends is amazing. Beethoven 5 takes you on such a journey from, yeah, exactly. Yeah. From this aggressive, scary, dark place to the most incredible, triumphant glory at the end with the big trumpets in C major. And it's about a 35-minute piece. And it's an amazing journey. And I think if someone listened to it, you don't need to sit there and do nothing else, but maybe put it on the commute instead of talk radio or something.
Right.
When you're in your car or something, or even when you're making dinner. I love listening to music when I'm making dinner or when I'm just doing stuff around the house. Because in a way you hear details that you don't necessarily hear otherwise. If you're just listening to music, sometimes your mind wanders in a different way. But if you're doing something else and listening to music, sometimes a detail that you hadn't heard makes itself known. So I listen to Beethoven 5 is great. I like the Mozart Hunt Quartet. That's the name, HUNT, as in going on the hunt. Is a string quartet that's really fun. I love it. If you just type in Mozart Hunt into Google, a million things will come up. The world of opera is very, very approachable because the stories are very simple and usually not a lot happens. So it's very easy to keep track of an opera. It's not like reading Anna Karenina where there's 70 characters to know. I think people should watch a really good performance of Carmen. I think Carmen is maybe, well, I can't say that. I would say one of the most perfect pieces of music ever written. In fact, before you were talking about how in the old days we didn't have CDs or records, and if you wanted music, you had to go to the hall. The great composer Brahms, he saw Carmen live more than 60 times, 60.
Wow.
That's how much Brahms loved it. Carmen is like the perfect opera. And anybody will know some of the themes, the habanera and all these. I mean, if you don't think you know it, you do. It's sort of like Beethoven 5. And watch a good production with subtitles, and I think you'd really get into it. It's very easy to get into. There's a great Puccini opera, La Bohème, which you've probably heard of. Which La Bohème is also extremely easy to appreciate, and it's kind of irresistible. And if you watch from the subtitles, you really, after 5 or 10 minutes, you get into it, even if it's foreign to you.
Right.
And I think a symphony by Brahms, like Brahms Symphony No. 4, again, it's one of these pieces that just grabs you from the beginning. And there's something about it that it just doesn't let go. It's his last symphony. It was written late in life. And it speaks to people in a very personal way.
It's awesome. Those are great. I'm writing them down on my thing. I'll listen while I'm cooking dinner for now.
And one more that maybe is just so fun. Mozart, the Mayor de Figaro, is such a fun. We talked about that when you were on my podcast a few months ago, and that is such a wonderful piece. The whole Mayor de Figaro is first of all, it's absolutely hilarious, and it's not funny like oh that would have been funny 200 years ago. I get it, but it's actually funny.
It is. It's very human. Yeah, and that's the Bugs Bunny. That's how I learned the Marriage of Figaro was through Looney Tunes.
And now you have the real thing.
Yeah. I love all those. One that I love, the Four Seasons and Eine Kleine Nachtmusik, but the Hallelujah chorus is amazing. That is when my son was in the womb, he used to jump and move around when that was playing. It was pretty cool. Even before, in the womb. That's an amazing, there's so many amazing, but this is really helpful. And I encourage everybody to try and listen to some classical music if they can.
I would say just one thing about it, that our world, and this is something that you talk about on your show a lot, is so chaotic and seems to be getting only more fragmented and more chaotic and more splintered. And music is a grounding force that I really think we need now more than ever. And I don't know if anything is going to bring stability to this country or the world. I don't see any particularly hopeful signs right now, but I do think music at least is something we can fall back on and know that it'll be there for us as things around us swirl in weird directions, as they are and probably will continue to be. I mean, I know you're very concerned about democracy, about foundations, the bedrock principles of our country, of our constitution, of the courts, of elections. I mean, all of this is suddenly up for grabs in a way that I don't think anybody anticipated it would ever be.
Who would have thought? Yeah, you're right. Actually, that's an amazing thing, because that is my top concern is the future of democracy versus authoritarianism. And in some weird way, I talk about exploration. I directed a film called One More Orbit that it talks about how exploration can bring people together, and music can bring. I love that, Daniel. The fact I think that's a thought that I'm gonna share again. That is one thing, Democrats and Republicans can all like Beethoven's Fifth.
Absolutely. I mean, you know that Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were great friends, and they went to the opera all the time together.
Right.
All the time. They were both passionate opera fans, and they loved that. I wish we had more people doing that today. I don't see Democrats and Republicans playing duets together. Wouldn't it be great if there was some senator who played violin and some who played piano, and they were like polar opposites? And what a message that would send. That
would actually. All right, that's good. I'm going to put that on that's another to-do list. I think I'm going to end it with that. That's a very good thought. But hey, Daniel, this is amazing. It was at first it was like, we're going to talk about classical music, and I think we could probably talk for hours. But this was a lot of fun, and now I'm motivated to go listen to some Brahms and Mozart.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, and hopefully there will be another time.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again. This is a lot of fun. Well, thanks for having us on. And again, if you enjoy the podcast, subscribe to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, and we'll see you next week.